There are towns in New Jersey that exist just beyond the reach of memory. Places where the leaves turn gold in October, where the diners stay open past midnight, and where neighbors still leave their doors unlocked because they believe, genuinely and with conviction, that nothing terrible could ever find them here. Pequannock Township sits in Morris County like a postcard from a different era. Tree-lined streets, modest colonial homes, backyards where children's laughter drifted over wooden fences on summer evenings, and a kind of quiet that felt, at least from the outside, like peace. But October 1997 shattered that quiet in a way the township has never fully recovered from. On the morning of October 14, 1997, a 7-year-old girl named Amanda Brown, a second grader at Pequannock Township Elementary School, a child who loved drawing horses and collecting smooth river stones, did not come home from school. Her backpack was found 3 blocks from her house, sitting upright on a curb beside a rusted storm drain, as if she had set it down carefully and simply stepped away. Her lunchbox was inside. So was a half-finished drawing of a horse, mane flowing, legs mid-gallop. Inside the front pocket, a permission slip for a class trip to the Liberty Science Center, unsigned, waiting for a parent's name. The swing in the Brown family's backyard hung still that evening. The toy truck her younger brother had left beside the garden steps lay on its side in the grass. And the question that would haunt Morris County for the next 26 years, a question whispered at town hall meetings, spoken in church parking lots, written in letters to investigators that arrived for years without answer, was this: who took Amanda Brown, and how did the answer live so close to home for so very long? Pequannock Township in 1997 was a community in the truest, most old-fashioned sense of that word. It occupied a quiet pocket of northern New Jersey, nestled between the Passaic River and the rolling woodlands that reached toward the Ramapo Mountains. The population hovered just above 13,000. There was a main street with a hardware store, a barber shop, a pharmacy that still had a soda counter, and a diner called Rosie's where the coffee was strong and the portions were generous, and nobody was a stranger for very long. The homes along Maple Ridge Drive, where the Brown family lived at number 44, were the kind built in the late 1950s and early 1960s, solid and square, with attached garages and mature oaks that shaded the sidewalks in summer. They were working-class homes, inhabited by people who believed in showing up to work, shoveling their neighbors' walk after a snowstorm, and keeping their lawns presentable. Pequannock was not wealthy. It was not poor. It was the kind of place where ambition was quiet and pride was loud, and where a missing child felt not just like a tragedy, but like an impossibility. Robert Brown, 41 at the time, worked as a forklift operator at a warehouse distribution center in Wayne, about 9 miles east. He left the house each morning at 6:15, thermos in hand, returning most evenings by 4:30. His wife, Patricia Brown, 38, with auburn hair she kept in a practical braid, worked part-time as a bookkeeper for a plumbing supply company in Butler. She worked Tuesdays and Thursdays, from 9 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, always timing her schedule around school pickup. Amanda was their eldest, 7 years old, slight for her age, with her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness. She was, by every account from her teacher, Mrs. Glendale, a child with a vivid inner world, quiet in groups but wildly expressive on paper. She drew constantly. Horses were her obsession. She had named the oak tree in the backyard. She carried her river stones in a small cloth bag her grandmother had sewn for her. Her younger brother, Daniel, was 4. He did not yet fully understand in October 1997 what was happening. He would understand later. He would spend decades understanding it. The morning of October 14th was a Tuesday, and so Patricia was scheduled to work. The weather that morning was unremarkable in the way that mid-October mornings in northern New Jersey often are, an overcast sky the color of old pewter, a chill that had arrived overnight and settled into the grass, turning the dew to something almost frosty at the edges. The maple on Maple Ridge was halfway through its turning, half green, half flame. It was the kind of morning that smells like wood smoke and fallen leaves, like the world preparing to go quiet for winter. Amanda ate cereal for breakfast, a brand with a cartoon character on the box that she no longer found interesting, but continued to eat out of loyalty to a preference she'd once had. She wore a blue corduroy jacket over her school clothes, and her backpack was a purple one with a reflective strip across the back. Patricia Brown remembered, in every interview she ever gave, watching Amanda walk to the corner to meet her friend Cassie Morrow, who lived 2 houses down. She remembered Amanda turning at the sidewalk edge and waving. Not a big wave. A small one, almost casual, the way children wave when they expect to be back soon. Patricia Brown remembered thinking, I need to sign that permission slip tonight. School let out at 3:15. Cassie Morrow walked home the usual route down Birch Street, left on Elm, right on Maple Ridge, and arrived at her own front door by 3:30. She had assumed Amanda was just behind her, or perhaps had stopped to look at something, as Amanda sometimes did. She had seen a stone on the sidewalk that she thought Amanda might like. She had not thought much of the moment. Amanda Brown was not home by 3:45. Patricia Brown, who had returned from work and was watching Daniel in the backyard, assumed Amanda had stopped at Cassie's. She called the Morrow house at 3:50. Cassie answered. No, Amanda was not there. Cassie had thought she was walking home on her own. Patricia Brown was out the front door before she had hung up the phone. She found the backpack at 4:07, according to her own account, 3 blocks from the house on the corner of Birch Street and Cedar Avenue, sitting on the curb beside the storm drain. Upright, undisturbed, as if Amanda had simply removed it and set it down with care. Clear's throat. The storm drain. Investigators would note later that the drain was one of those wide, older grates common in Morris County, large enough, as one detective would write in his notes, to have concealed something small, something that might have been dropped or placed, though nothing was ever found inside it. It was noted. It was searched. It yielded nothing. Patricia Brown did not scream by her own account. She picked up the backpack, held it to her chest, and began calling Amanda's name. Her voice carried in the chill October air. No one heard an answer. By Fort Wentry, she had called the Pequannock Township Police Department. By 4:45, the first patrol unit arrived. By 5:30, as the pewter sky began darkening toward evening and the temperature dropped another 4 degrees, Robert Brown had been reached at the warehouse in Wayne and was driving home at speeds well above the posted limit. By 6 o'clock that evening, the corner of Birch and Cedar had a cluster of 4 police vehicles, 24 neighbors, and a portable light the officers had retrieved from the station. By 7 o'clock, there was still no Amanda. The swing hung still. The toy truck lay on its side in the grass. The permission slip waited in the front pocket of the purple backpack, unsigned. And in the cloth bag her grandmother had sewn for her, nestled inside the backpack's main compartment, were 6 smooth river stones, each one selected for something specific Amanda had seen in it. A vein of white, a particular roundness, a warmth of color that had caught her eye. She had not abandoned those stones. She would never have abandoned those stones. That was the first thing Patricia Brown told investigators. And it was the detail, small, specific, and absolutely certain, that shaped everything that followed. Part 2. The investigation. Search and growing suspicions. By the morning of October 15, 1997, the search for Amanda Brown had expanded from a neighborhood effort into something larger and more coordinated. The Morris County Prosecutor's Office had been notified. The New Jersey State Police Missing Persons Unit had sent 2 investigators. Pequannock Township Police Chief Douglas Farrand had issued a statement at 7 in the morning, his voice careful and measured in the way of a man who understood the weight of the moment and did not want to add to the panic already spreading through the community. The search teams divided the township into grids. Volunteers, and they came in remarkable numbers, beginning at 6 in the morning, some still in work clothes, some bringing their own flashlights and thermoses of coffee, walked in long lines through the woodlands that bordered the northern edge of town, through the retention pond area behind the elementary school, through the churchyard of St. Michael's on Route 23. Search dogs from the Bergen County K-9 unit arrived at 9. They worked the area around the storm drain on Birch and Cedar, tracked northeast for 200 yards, then lost the scent near the edge of a municipal parking lot on Walnut Street. The parking lot was shared by a small row of commercial properties, a laundromat, a tax preparation office, an auto body shop that had been closed for renovation since September, and a real estate agency called First Choice Realty. Investigators noted the parking lot. They noted the auto body shop with its shuttered bay doors. They noted all of it. The community response was overwhelming and heartbreaking in equal measure. By October 16th, homemade posters with Amanda's school photograph, the one from the previous spring, where she was wearing a yellow shirt and smiling at something just to the left of the camera, had appeared on every telephone pole within 3 miles of Maple Ridge Drive. The diner at Rosie's became an informal coordination hub, with volunteers signing in and out, with maps spread across the counter, with the owner's daughter running a free coffee station from 6 in the morning until 10 at night. Clear's throat. But beneath the organized effort, beneath the neighborhood solidarity and the volunteers and the search dogs and the grid walks, investigators were beginning to notice things. Small things. The kind of small things that experienced detectives learn to hold quietly, to carry without showing, because showing them too early can close doors that need to remain open. The first inconsistency arrived within 36 hours. Robert Brown, in his initial statement to investigators on the evening of October 14th, said he had been at work until 4:15, had received Patricia's call, and had driven directly home from Wayne. Standard distance, standard drive time. His supervisor at the warehouse confirmed he had been present through most of the afternoon shift. Most of the afternoon. A pause. When investigators pressed the warehouse's sign-in and sign-out log, a paper system kept at the loading dock entrance, they found that Robert Brown had signed out at 3:40, not 4:15. At 3:40, which was 35 minutes before Amanda's backpack was found, and at least 50 minutes before Patricia's distress call. Investigators asked Robert about this discrepancy quietly, conversationally, in the way that good detectives approach early inconsistencies. He paused before answering. Not a long pause, a second, perhaps 2, but those who were in the room later recalled it. He said he thought he might have left a little early that day, that he sometimes lost track of the exact time. He said he might have stopped somewhere on the way home. He was not sure where. A gas station, perhaps. No gas station receipt was ever found. His supervisor, Jim Calhoun, a heavy-set man who had worked with Robert for 6 years, told investigators that Robert was a reliable employee, never gave any trouble, but that he had seemed off for the last few weeks of September and early October. Calhoun described it as distracted, like his mind was working on something else, like he was waiting for something. Those who knew him said he was a loving father. His neighbors on Maple Ridge said he coached youth soccer one season, that he grilled on summer weekends, that he was the kind of man who waved from the driveway and meant it. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves about the sign-out log and the missing hours. They whispered about the absence of a gas station receipt. They whispered about the fact that, in the days following Amanda's disappearance, Robert Brown never once publicly asked anyone to come forward with information. He stood beside Patricia at the press conferences. He held her hand. His expression was described variously by attending journalists as stoic, controlled, unreadable. One reporter from the Daily Record noted in her personal files that would resurface decades later, that when Patricia Brown broke down while describing Amanda Stone's at the October 17th press conference, Robert Brown did not look at his wife. He looked at something slightly above and to the left of the gathered cameras. His jaw tightened. His eyes did not fill. Investigators from the State Police Missing Persons Unit, led by Detective Leonard Voss, a 20-year veteran who had worked cases across 4 counties, compiled a detailed timeline of October 14th. The timeline contained 17 separate entries. 3 of them, Voss would later note in his case file, could not be independently corroborated. All 3 involved Robert Brown. The physical evidence gathered in the first 72 hours was sparse. The backpack yielded no foreign fingerprints beyond Amanda's and Patricia's. The storm drain and surrounding area produced no forensic evidence of a struggle. No witness reported seeing a vehicle stop on Birch Street between 3:15 and 4 o'clock. No one reported hearing anything unusual. What they did find on October 19th, 5 days after Amanda's disappearance, was a single item, a blue corduroy button, the kind that might have come from a child's jacket, found in the grass at the edge of the municipal parking lot on Walnut Street, 20 yards from the auto body shop's locked side door. One button, blue corduroy, the same color as the jacket Amanda had been wearing when she waved goodbye to her mother on the morning of October 14th. The auto body shop was searched with a warrant. Nothing was found. The shop had been under renovation for 6 weeks. Workers confirmed the space had been unoccupied. Forensic analysis of the button confirmed it was consistent with the type of button used on children's coats of that era, though a specific match to Amanda's jacket could not be established because the jacket had never been recovered. The button was logged, photographed, bagged, added to a file that was growing both in volume and in unanswered questions. By November 1997, the search had formally scaled back. The volunteer effort continued in diminished form through Christmas. Patricia Brown appeared twice more on local news, her face hollowed by the kind of grief that remakes a person from the inside out. Robert Brown stood beside her each time. By the spring of 1998, with no new leads and no forensic breakthroughs, Detective Voss documented in his case file what every investigator on the team already understood. The trail had gone cold. The case was moved to the Morris County Prosecutor's Office Cold Case Unit. It would sit there for years, for decades. The swing still hung in the backyard of 44 Maple Ridge Drive. No one pushed it. Part 3: The Silence. Years passing, life after. Time does not heal in cases like this one. That is a fundamental misunderstanding of what grief of this particular magnitude actually does to a person, to a family, to a community. What time does, what it actually, measurably does, is accumulate. It piles weight on weight. It teaches the people who carry it to walk as if they are not burdened, and it punishes them in private for the effort. By the summer of 1998, Patricia Brown had stopped sleeping through the night. This was documented not by investigators but by her sister, Ellen Caruso, of Denville, who visited frequently in the months following Amanda's disappearance, and who would give a recorded interview to the Morris County Prosecutor's Office in 2021. Ellen described Patricia as a woman living inside a sentence that would not end. She described the house on Maple Ridge Drive as unchanged from the night of October 14th in ways that were not ordinary. Amanda's bedroom door remained closed. Her river stones, a second collection she had kept in a mason jar on her windowsill, remained on the windowsill, the jar undisturbed. Daniel, at 4 and then 5 and then 6, would sometimes sit outside Amanda's closed door and conduct quiet, one-sided conversations with the space behind it. Robert Brown, in the year following Amanda's disappearance, threw himself into a kind of mechanical productivity. He worked extra shifts. He repainted the garage. He built a wooden garden bed along the back fence. He did not speak about Amanda except when pressed. He did not cry in front of anyone. Clears throat. For those who have ever loved someone and simultaneously, inexplicably, feared them, who have sat at a kitchen table at midnight watching a face that no longer reads the way it once did, trying to reconcile what you know with what you feel, the particular loneliness of Patricia Brown's position in those months and years is not difficult to imagine. It is, in fact, painfully easy. She began to notice things she told herself she was not noticing. She noticed that Robert never suggested they return to the municipal parking lot area when the family went for walks. She noticed that he showed no emotion at all when Daniel, around age 6, drew a picture of their family that included Amanda, a stick figure with long hair and what was clearly meant to be a stone in one hand, and taped it to the refrigerator. Robert had looked at the drawing for a long moment, then opened the refrigerator, retrieved a beverage, and left the kitchen. She noticed that in the autumn of 1999, Robert suggested they move. He framed it as financial, as a fresh start. He had found a listing in Ledgewood, a modest ranch house on a cul-de-sac about 17 miles southwest. Patricia refused. She said she could not leave the house where Amanda had lived. She said she would not leave the door closed or the stones on the windowsill for strangers to move. Robert did not push. He did not argue. He nodded and went to the garage. But by 2001, the marriage had developed the particular texture of a thing maintained rather than felt. Patricia and Robert functioned. They drove Daniel to school. They attended parent-teacher conferences. They ate dinner most evenings at the same table. They did not fight. The absence of fighting, Patricia would later tell her therapist, a woman she began seeing in 2002, was itself frightening. She said the silence in their marriage felt less like peace and more like holding breath. Detective Leonard Voss, meanwhile, did not forget the case. He had taken early retirement from the state police in 2003, but maintained contact with the Morris County Cold Case Unit. He would call every few months to ask if anything new had emerged. There was a box in the cold case storage room that contained the original evidence and the full case file. Inside it, the button, the photographs, the timeline with its 3 unverifiable entries, the press conference footage, the notes from the initial interviews, and the sign-out log from the warehouse in Wayne. The one that showed 3:40, not 4:15, on the afternoon of October 14, 1997. Voss, in retirement, kept copies of his own notes at home. He would later say, in an interview given to investigators in 2022, that he had never in 20 years of casework stopped thinking about Robert Brown. He said it with the flatness of a man who is stating something not for effect, but because it is simply, precisely true. Daniel Brown grew up. He was a quiet boy who became a quiet teenager and then a thoughtful, careful young man. He graduated from Mount Olive High School in 2011. He studied criminal justice at Montclair State University, a choice his mother understood without asking about it. He spoke rarely about Amanda in public, but Ellen Caruso later described a conversation she had with Daniel when he was about 19, in which he told her that he remembered more about the days after Amanda's disappearance than most people assumed. He remembered, for instance, that on the evening of October 14th, when he was 4 years old, he had asked his father where Amanda was. And his father had said, "She'll be home soon." Not "we don't know," not "we're looking for her, she'll be home soon." As if he knew the answer to the question, just not the timing. Ellen Caruso sat with that for 17 years before she told anyone. Clears throat. The marriage between Patricia and Robert Brown ended formally in the spring of 2004. The divorce was not contentious in the traditional sense, no arguments over furniture, no disputed custody. Daniel was old enough by then to state a preference, and he stated it clearly and quietly in favor of his mother. Robert moved to an apartment in Parsippany. He remarried in 2008, a woman named Carol whom he had met through a co-worker. He continued to work. He lived quietly. He did not speak about Amanda, about Pequannock, about October 1997. He had, to all observable appearances, simply moved forward. The cold case file sat in its box. The mason jar of river stones sat on Amanda Brown's windowsill, undisturbed, as Patricia kept the house on Maple Ridge Drive, the door still closed, the grief still present and dense as the old oak tree in the backyard. And then, in March of 2021, something changed. Part 4, The Revelation. Truth emerges. Daniel Brown was 31 years old in the spring of 2021. He had been working as an investigative aide for the Morris County Prosecutor's Office for 4 years, a fact that people who later learned it tended to find either remarkable or inevitable, depending on what they already believed about the nature of grief and the paths it carves through a person's life. He was not assigned to his sister's case. He had, in fact, been formally recused from any involvement with it when he joined the office. He maintained the boundary scrupulously. But Daniel Brown lived inside that case in ways no policy memo could address. On March 8, 2021, Daniel was having dinner with his Aunt Ellen at a restaurant in Denville when she told him about the conversation she had carried for 17 years. She told him what he had said as a 4-year-old, "Where is Amanda?" and what his father had answered, "She'll be home soon." She told him she had never been certain it was significant, had told herself for years it could be explained, that a man might say almost anything in the shock of that night, that it meant nothing. But she told him because, she said, she was 67 years old and could not continue to carry it any longer, and because she believed, with a clarity she could no longer rationalize away, that it did mean something. Daniel Brown did not respond immediately. He set down his fork. He looked at the table for a long moment. Then he looked at his aunt and said quietly, "I know." He requested a meeting with Morris County Prosecutor's Office Chief of Detectives Maria Salcido the following Monday. Clears throat. What Daniel brought to that meeting was not new evidence, not in the technical sense. He brought his aunt's account of the dinner conversation. He brought a documented pattern of behavioral observations he had compiled over years with the careful, methodical precision of a person who has been building a case inside his own mind without fully admitting it to himself. He brought, most significantly, a piece of information he had been holding without knowing quite what to do with it. In 2018, while helping his mother sort through boxes of old documents in preparation for minor renovations in the house on Maple Ridge Drive, Daniel had found a receipt. It was tucked inside an old auto insurance document folder, the kind with elastic bands, the kind kept in desk drawers for years because no one is quite sure when they might be needed. The receipt was from a storage facility in Rockaway, a self-storage compound on Route 46, dated October 14, 1997. Time of transaction, 4:02 in the afternoon. A payment receipt for a storage unit, monthly rate, unit number 14. The unit was registered in the name of a holding title, a secondary name that, traced through records, led back to a form of identification connected to Robert Brown. Daniel had photographed the receipt in 2018 and said nothing, put the photo on a flash drive, and placed the flash drive in a desk drawer in his own apartment. He had spent 3 years deciding what to do with it. He had spent 3 years understanding that knowing something and being prepared for the consequences of that knowing are not the same thing. On March 15, 2021, Chief of Detectives Maria Salcedo formally reopened the case of Amanda Brown, Morris County Case Number NJ1997MC00447. The storage facility in Rockaway had been demolished in 2009. Unit 14 had been vacated in 1998, its contents cleared and unrecorded, as was standard procedure for expired rental units at that facility. Whatever had been stored there was gone. But the receipt placed Robert Brown at a location on Route 46 in Rockaway at 4:02 in the afternoon on October 14, 1997. A location that was 8 miles from the Brown family home, 6 miles from the parking lot on Walnut Street, and 12 miles from the warehouse in Wayne. It placed him actively, documentably, somewhere during the 3 hours that had never been fully accounted for. A long pause. The State Police Major Crimes Unit joined the investigation in April 2021. Working alongside the Morris County Cold Case Unit, now led by Detective First Grade Corinne Metz, who had been 4 years out of the academy when Amanda first disappeared, and had never forgotten the case. Investigators began building a case that had to work across 23 years of elapsed time, degraded memories, destroyed evidence, and a suspect who had spent more than 2 decades living under the assumption that the silence around him was permanent. Investigators re-interviewed every surviving witness from the original 1997 case. They located Jim Calhoun, now retired in Rockaway County, Florida, who confirmed, with a certainty he said he had held since 1997, but had never been formally asked to reaffirm, that Robert Brown had signed out at 3:40 on October 14th, had appeared agitated in the days preceding that date, and had at one point, perhaps 2 weeks before Amanda disappeared. Asked Calhoun in a seemingly casual conversation whether the warehouse security cameras covered the east parking lot. They did not. Calhoun had thought nothing of it at the time. He thought about it differently in 2021. Investigators also located a woman named Diane Ferris, who had worked as a manager at the self-storage facility in Rockaway from 1995 to 2001. She was 72 years old and living in Netcong, New Jersey. She had given no statement in 1997 because no one had come to the facility in 1997. No one had known to come. She confirmed, in a recorded interview in May 2021, that Unit 14 had been rented by a customer she remembered because he had paid exclusively in cash, had always arrived at the facility after closing hours using the late access code, and had cleared the unit abruptly in the spring of 1998, within 2 weeks of the 1-year anniversary of Amanda's disappearance. She described the customer from an old photograph as consistent in appearance with Robert Brown circa 1997. She said he had never, in her experience, made eye contact at the front desk. Clears throat. On September 22, 2022, a Thursday morning, a clear morning, the kind of September day in northern New Jersey, where the sky is so precisely blue, it seems almost unrealistic. 2 state police vehicles and 1 Morris County prosecutor's office sedan pulled into the parking lot of a commercial property in Parsippany. Robert Brown, 66 years old by then, was working part-time as a floor manager at a hardware distribution center. He was informed of the investigators' presence by a coworker and walked out into the parking lot to meet them. Investigators reported that he looked at the vehicles, then at the faces of the officers, and said nothing. He did not ask what was happening. He did not ask what the charge was. He stood with his hands at his sides, and his expression, described by one of the arresting officers in her written report as the face of someone receiving news they have been expecting for a very long time, showed nothing that read as surprise. He was placed under arrest on charges of first-degree aggravated conduct, resulting in the death of a child, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice, under statutes that allowed for prosecution in cases where physical remains or primary forensic evidence could not be established, but where circumstantial evidence met the threshold of a prosecutable case. He was read his rights in the parking lot of the distribution center, in front of 3 coworkers who later told journalists they had never known him to be anything other than quiet and professional. He was placed in the rear seat of the prosecutor's office sedan. He looked straight ahead. The media response was immediate and significant. Within 4 hours of the arrest, every major New Jersey outlet had the story. Within 6 hours, it had reached the national wires. The coverage was breathless in places, measured in others. Former neighbors from Maple Ridge Drive gave interviews on their front steps. A woman who had organized the volunteer search in October 1997 stood before a television camera in the Pequannock Township municipal parking lot. She was in her 70s now, her hair fully white, and said, very quietly, that she had hoped for this day and dreaded it simultaneously because hopping for it had required believing something she had not wanted to believe about a man she had stood beside at 24 town vigils. Patricia Brown, who had remained in the house on Maple Ridge Drive, gave a brief written statement through her attorney. It said, "I have spent 25 years waiting for the truth about my daughter. I do not have words today. I have only the hope that what comes next is something Amanda deserved, which is honesty." Ellen Caruso, when reached at her home in Denville, said simply, "I should have told someone sooner. I will carry that for the rest of my life." Clears throat. The community response in Pequannock Township was, in the words of Mayor Diane Howell, who had lived in the township for 40 years, absolutely shaking. People who had grown up on Maple Ridge Drive, who had attended the vigils, who had carried candles in the rain at the October memorial services that Patricia had organized every year for a decade, found themselves caught between relief and a grief renewed. Because an arrest, in a case like this one, does not return what was taken. It confirms only what was suspected, and the confirmation, for a community that had wanted to believe the disappearance was the work of a stranger passing through, someone unknowable, someone safely external, was its own particular and terrible wound. There were those who doubted. This must be stated and stated plainly because it is true. There were people who had known Robert Brown for decades, who had played cards with him, who had lent him tools and borrowed his ladder, who said publicly that the arrest was a mistake, that the evidence was circumstantial, that the justice system was compensating for a cold case by closing it on the nearest available name. These people spoke on local radio and in letters to the editor. Their skepticism was genuine. It deserves acknowledgement. And there were those who said they had always known, that the sign-out log had never sat right with them, that his face at the press conferences had never read the way grief is supposed to read, that the words, "She'll be home soon," spoken to a 4-year-old on the night of her sister's disappearance, were the words of a man who was not searching for an answer but containing one. The pre-trial hearings began in the spring of 2023. The case, prosecuted by Morris County Assistant Prosecutor Thomas Albano, a spare, methodical man known for the care with which he assembled circumstantial cases, rested on the accumulation of every small thing that had never quite fit. The sign-out log, the storage facility receipt, the button in the parking lot, Diane Ferris's testimony about the late-night access pattern and the abrupt clearing of the unit, Jim Calhoun's account of the security camera question, Ellen Caruso's memory of a dinner table silence held for 23 years, and Daniel Brown, who took the stand in October 2023, 26 years to the month after his sister disappeared, and who spoke, in a quiet and measured voice that did not waver, about being 4 years old and asking his father a question, and receiving an answer that had taken him 30 years to fully understand. "He said she'll be home soon," Daniel Brown testified. "He said it the way my father said everything, like he already knew how the story ended." Robert Brown, represented by defense counsel arguing insufficient direct evidence, sat at the defense table throughout the proceedings with that same controlled expression that had been described since October 1997. He did not testify. He looked straight ahead. In January 2024, after 11 days of jury deliberations that reflected the genuine complexity of a case built on circumstance and time, and the calculus of small, broken things, Robert Brown was convicted on the charges of aggravated conduct, resulting in the death of a minor and obstruction of justice. The evidence tampering charge was reduced in the final verdict. He was sentenced in March 2024 to 40 years, with no possibility of reduced supervision before serving 30. When the verdict was read, Patricia Brown, seated in the gallery beside Ellen Caruso and Daniel, did not cry immediately. She sat very still. Then she reached out and took Daniel's hand, and he took it, and they sat like that for a long time while the courtroom moved around them. Amanda's body was never recovered. The question of where she is remains and will likely always remain unanswered. It is the wound inside the wound, the part of this story that justice, however real and however necessary, cannot fully close. Closing. There is a house on Maple Ridge Drive in Pequannock Township, New Jersey, that still has an oak tree in the backyard. The swing is gone now. Patricia had it taken down sometime in the early 2010s, when it became less of a memorial and more of a weight she could not keep looking at. But the oak tree remains, and if you were to visit that house on an October morning, an overcast morning, the sky pewter gray, the maples mid-turn, you might understand something about what it means to live inside an unanswered question for 26 years. The mason jar of river stones sat on Amanda Brown's windowsill for those same 26 years. 6 stones, each chosen for something particular, a vein of white, a roundness, a warmth of color that had caught a 7-year-old's eye. Patricia Brown has said in the years since the conviction that she has left the stones where they are. She has no plans to move them. This case was not solved by a dramatic forensic breakthrough. It was not solved by a witness who walked into a police station with a piece of evidence in an evidence bag. It was solved by time, which is to say, by the accumulated weight of small things that didn't fit, carried by people who could not put them down. A retired detective who called a cold case unit every few months for 15 years. A woman who held a dinner table memory for 23 years. A brother who photographed a receipt in 2018 and spent 3 years deciding what to do with the photograph. And a prosecutor who believed that a case built from fragments, if each fragment was honest and true, was still a case worth making. Clears throat. For those who have ever sat with a doubt they couldn't explain, who have held something in their mind that didn't fit neatly into the life they were living, the story of Amanda Brown is a reminder of what silence costs. Not just the silence of the guilty, but the silence of those who suspected, who hesitated, who told themselves the small things that didn't fit were probably nothing. Ellen Caruso understood this. She said she would carry the years of her silence for the rest of her life. She said it without excusing herself, which was the truest and most difficult kind of honesty. Amanda Brown was 7 years old. She loved horses and drew them constantly, mane flowing, legs mid-gallop. She named the oak tree in the backyard. She collected river stones for what she saw in them, a particular light, a specific warmth, something worth keeping. She waved goodbye on an October morning in a small New Jersey town and did not come home. She deserved, and for 26 years was denied, the simple and fundamental dignity of truth. She has it now. Incompletely, imperfectly, in the only way the law can give it, but she has it now. Music returns, the same low piano, slower now, resolving into something almost like stillness. Justice is not always swift. It is not always clean. But in the story of this case, in the accumulation of small, honest things that outlasted silence and time, and the comfortable fiction of a town that believed nothing terrible could find it, there is something that deserves to be named. It is the refusal to stop looking. It is the refusal to let the unanswered question become ordinary. It is the weight that certain people carry because they understand, even when it is difficult and inconvenient and long, that a child who waved goodbye on a Tuesday morning in October deserves someone who does not stop asking why she never came home.